Good evening, listeners. Welcome to Noir Intellect. I'm your host, Victor Blackwood. If you enjoy mysteries, hidden clues, and uncovering the truth, don't forget to like and subscribe. And tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Leave it in the comments below. Now, keep your eyes open and your mind sharp. The mystery begins now. Chapter 1. The garden that should have been dead. The flowers had been dead for 11 years. This was not a figure of speech, which was fortunate because figures of speech have never been admissible evidence in a murder investigation, and I had no intention of beginning my association with the Bellamy Street garden by confusing botany with arithmetic. The flowers had been dead for 11 years. The garden had been dead for 11 years, too, if you allowed a little latitude for weeds. Then, on a Tuesday morning in June, it bloomed, not gradually, not after rain, because somebody had finally hired a gardener, discovered a neglected irrigation system, or remembered that spring had been invented for more purposes than making people complain about pollen. It bloomed in a single night. By 8 o'clock that morning, every newspaper photographer who could find Bellamy Street had found it. By 9, 3 television vans were parked along the curb. By 10, the sidewalk was crowded with residents, schoolchildren, deliverymen, retired people, and men who had no apparent occupation except appearing wherever something unusual had happened. By 11, the city had acquired a new attraction. At noon, Nero Wolfe acquired a client. The client was not the owner of the estate. That distinction became important later. At the time, I merely regarded it as another inconvenience. I was sitting in the brownstones' front room, reading the morning paper when the telephone rang. I answered it. Goodwin speaking. A woman's voice said, "Is this Mr. Wolfe's office? That depends on whether you're calling to sell him something. I need Mr. Wolfe. Everyone does. This concerns Bellamy Street." I glanced at the newspaper. There it was on page 3. Dead estate blooms overnight. The photograph beneath the headline showed a stone house half hidden by flowers. "You're calling about the garden?" "Yes." "Then you have reached the right house and possibly the wrong detective." I was told Mr. Wolfe understands unusual things. He understands expensive things better. I can pay. Now we're making progress. She gave her name as Mrs. Eleanor Vance. I took down the address. Before I could ask anything else, she said, "Please come quickly." "Why?" There was a pause. Then she said, "Because I don't think the flowers are meant for us." The line went dead. I sat there for several seconds. That sentence had the unpleasant quality of a good clue. I carried the information upstairs. Wolfe was in the orchid rooms. He had been in the orchid rooms for 2 hours, which was not unusual. Wolfe regarded his orchids as other men regarded their families, except that he generally trusted the orchids more. The rooms were warm and humid, bright, with carefully regulated lamps. The air smelled of damp bark, green leaves, and the faint sweetness of flowers that had been coaxed into perfection by methods Wolfe guarded more closely than some people guarded bank accounts. He was examining a white orchid. I waited. Wolfe continued examining it. "Yes, I have a prospective client. Does she have money?" "She says she can pay." "Then she is not prospective. She says her garden bloomed overnight." He looked at me. "Which garden?" "Bellamy Street." "I know it. Of course you do. The Bellamy estate was neglected. 11 years, 9. I checked the article. I have the article." He pointed toward a folded newspaper resting beside a pot of orchids. I looked at him. "How did you get it?" "Fritz. Fritz has become a dangerous man. He has always been dangerous. You merely failed to notice." I picked up the newspaper. Wolfe's finger remained on the photograph. "The garden was abandoned after the death of Malcolm Bellamy," he said. "Yes. The property passed to several beneficiaries, according to the article. One beneficiary remains, Mrs. Vance." He nodded. "She called." "What does she want? Me to go look at flowers?" "No, that was my first thought." "Your first thought is occasionally correct." "She says the flowers appeared overnight." "Impossible." "That was my second thought." "Your second thought is usually less useful." I smiled. "There's more. Naturally. She says she doesn't think the flowers are meant for them." Wolfe's expression changed, only slightly. "But after working for him long enough, I had learned to recognize the smallest movement of interest. That, he said, is not botanical. No. You're coming? No. Of course not. Observe. I'll observe. Do not speak to reporters. That will hurt. Do not speak to neighbors unless necessary. That will hurt more. Find out why the flowers were planted. They weren't planted. Find out what happened. Better. And Miss Goodwin. Yes? Do not permit your curiosity to outrun your judgment. That would be like asking a horse not to run, because it might arrive somewhere. He waved me away. Go. I went. The Bellamy estate stood on a narrow street lined with old brick houses and expensive renovations pretending to be old brick houses. Bellamy Street had once been respectable in the grand manner. Now it was respectable in the real estate manner. The sidewalks were clean, the trees were mature, the houses had brass plaques, polished doors, and discreet security systems. Then there was number 17. The Bellamy estate occupied most of the block between two intersecting streets. A wrought iron fence surrounded the property. Beyond it stood a large grey stone house, with steep roofs, tall chimneys, and windows darkened by years of dust. The house itself looked abandoned. The garden did not. The garden looked like a theatrical set designed by a man who had never seen a real garden, but had heard that flowers were supposed to be colourful. It was magnificent. That was the first problem. The second was that it was impossible. Rows of roses stood in perfect bloom. Irises formed narrow bands. White lilies occupied geometric beds. Foxgloves rose at measured intervals. Poppies filled one section in a sweep of red. Hydrangeas clustered beneath the eastern windows. Climbing vines covered the old stone walls in patterns so regular that I wondered whether the gardener had used a ruler. Nothing about it looked natural. Nature is a careless designer. It allows one plant to crowd another. It lets a rose climb where it pleases. It scatters seeds. It produces gaps. It creates accidents. The Bellamy garden contained none. Every flower seemed to know where it belonged. The crowd outside the fence knew something was wrong, even if they didn't know what. A reporter from the Herald was interviewing an elderly man. A woman with a camera was trying to photograph the entire garden through one lens. Children pressed against the iron bars. Two policemen stood near the gate. I showed one of them my identification. Archie Goodwin, the younger officer looked at me. Nero Wolfe, unfortunately. He smiled. Inspector Kramer mentioned you might come. That's reassuring. The officer unlocked the gate. Mrs. Vance is inside the house. I'll find her. I stepped through. The change was immediate. Outside, people talked. Inside, the garden was almost silent. Bees moved among the flowers. A breeze touched the upper branches of an elm. Somewhere water dripped. That was all. The garden seemed less like a garden than a diagram. I walked slowly. The first thing I noticed was the roses. They had been planted in a long, narrow bed, extending from the front gate toward the eastern side of the estate. The bed was approximately 3 feet wide. Every rose stood at almost exactly the same height. The blossoms were at the same stage. That bothered me. All of them bloomed together? I asked. A voice behind me said, That's what everyone keeps asking. I turned. Mrs. Eleanor Vance was in her 70s, perhaps. Though she carried herself with the stiff dignity of a woman who had spent her life refusing to allow age to make decisions for her. She wore a dark green dress and a grey cardigan. Her white hair was arranged neatly. Her eyes were sharp. You are Mr. Goodwin, yes. You've come from Mr. Wolfe. That's right. She looked toward the house. I was afraid he would come himself. He doesn't like gardens. Does he dislike flowers? Quite the opposite. Then why? He dislikes leaving the house. That earned the faintest smile. I suppose that is reasonable. It has kept him healthy. Has it? Not physically. She looked at me more carefully. I understand. We walked together. How long has the garden been abandoned since Malcolm died? 11 years. Nearly 12. The article said 9. The article was wrong. By 2 years. By 2 years and 4 months. That's a more interesting mistake. She stopped beside a bed of lilies. Nothing here has been touched since Malcolm's death. Nothing? No gardener. No caretaker. One man came occasionally to check the house. Who? George Bell. Family. No. Employee. Former employee. What happened to him? He died 3 years ago. Who maintained the garden? No one. I looked at the flowers. Then explain this. I can't. Did you see them yesterday? No. When did you last see the garden? Yesterday afternoon. And it looked dead? Not dead. She considered the word. Untended. How long was it unattended? Years. And this morning? She looked at the flowers. Perfect. Who has access to the property? The beneficiaries, 3 families. Names? She hesitated. Why? Mr. Wolfe will want to know. Then tell him yourself. I may. That was my first indication that Mrs. Vance was not merely frightened. She was careful. What happened last night? I asked. Nothing. You were here? No. At my home. Who had discovered the flowers? A neighbor. Who? Mrs. Dalton. Did she enter? No. Who did the police? At what times? 7:20. How did they enter? Through the front gate. Unlocked? Yes. Who unlocked it? I did. When? At 7:40. Then how did police enter at 7:20? She looked at me. Exactly. That was the first fact of the case that interested me. Who told you the police entered at 7:20? Mrs. Dalton. Yes. How did she know? I haven't asked. Then perhaps we should. She shook her head. Mr. Goodwin, there is something you need to understand. What? My has been trying to sell this property. That makes sense. No. She looked toward the house. It makes no sense at all. Why? Because every time we attempt to sell it, something happens, such as a surveyor quits. Why? He says the measurements don't match. That happens. A second surveyor says the same thing, less ordinary. Then a prospective buyer receives an anonymous letter. What does it say? Nothing, only a drawing. Of what? She pointed. Those, I followed her finger, the flowers, the narrow beds, the lines. Not exactly. What does it show? Paths. Garden paths? No, she lowered her voice. Property lines. I looked again. Suddenly the geometry seemed different. The roses formed one narrow line toward the east wing. The irises pointed toward the carriage house. A line of white lilies extended toward the rear boundary. A row of red poppies seemed to aim directly at the old greenhouse. I crouched. The arrangement was too exact. Who planted these? I don't know. When? I told you. She nodded. Could someone have entered through the gate? Perhaps. Any security? No. Locks on the house, not the garden. No footprints. Plenty, from reporters. Now, before she hesitated. There were some. Where? Along the flower beds. Fresh? Some. Did police photograph them? Yes. Are the photographs with the police? I stood. Let's find them. We reached the house. The front door opened onto a broad entrance hall where dust lay thick on the marble floor. The air smelled of old wood and closed rooms. Paintings lined the walls. A grandfather clock stood frozen at 4:17. Why keep the house, Mrs. Vance said. Because selling it has proved difficult. Why? The Bellamy Trust. Legal complication? Yes. What kind? Ownership. There it was again. Ownership. I made a mental note. Who is Malcolm Bellamy? My great-uncle. Original owner? Yes. What did he do? Real estate. Successful. Very. Any enemies? She smiled without humor. Anyone successful in New York accumulates enemies. Specific ones. Did he die naturally? Heart attack. At the house? Yes. Which room? Study. Was anyone with him? No. Was the estate disputed? Immediately. By whom? That explains the beneficiaries. Not entirely. She stopped beside a staircase. The will was unusual. How? It left the property to 3 branches of the family jointly. Why? We don't know. Did Malcolm explain? No. Did he leave instructions? Only one. What? Never divide the garden. I looked toward the windows. That sounds significant. It was always significant. Why? He considered the garden part of the property title. I stared at her. Not merely decoration? No. How did he phrase it? Exactly as I said. Never divide the garden. I wrote it down. Has anyone tried? Several times. And the surveyors couldn't agree on boundaries because of the garden, because the garden seems to indicate different boundaries. I looked back outside. The flowers had stopped being beautiful. They had become evidence. I spent the next 3 hours walking the estate. The police had marked several areas with small numbered cards. The garden extended behind the house, much farther than it appeared from the street. There were old paths, stone benches, a ruined greenhouse, a fountain with no water, a gardener's shed, an orchard, a carriage house, and the flower beds. Everywhere I looked, the same strange precision appeared. A row of yellow roses pointed toward the greenhouse. A line of purple irises terminated at the carriage house. White lilies formed a narrow corridor toward the eastern boundary. Red poppies pointed toward the old stone wall. I drew the arrangement in my notebook. Then I stepped back. The flowers formed lines. Not random lines, directions. That was obvious. What was not obvious was what they pointed toward. I returned to the house. Mrs. Vance was waiting in the study. Did you find anything? Yes. Is it dangerous? That depends on whether you consider gardening dangerous. She didn't smile. Mr. Goodwin. Yes, I want to sell this property. Why? Because I cannot afford to maintain it. Understandable. But the others refuse. Why? They believe there is something here. Is there? She looked directly at me. I think so. Something valuable? I don't know. Something incriminating. She hesitated. Perhaps. Against whom? My family. That changed the atmosphere. Which family? All of us. Why? Because Malcolm Bellamy was not the man we believed him to be. Before I could ask more, a noise came from outside. A car door slammed. Then another's. Vance looked toward the window. Who is that? I crossed to the curtains. 3 men stood near the gate. One carried a camera. Another held a long measuring case. The third was smoking. Reporters? No. Do you know them? Mrs. Vance's face had gone pale. One of them. Who? She whispered the name. Martin Bellamy. Family? One of the beneficiaries? No. Then who? The man trying to buy us out. That was when I understood why she had called Wolfe. The flowers were not the beginning of the trouble. They were the newest message. I returned to the brownstone after dark. Wolfe was in the office. Dinner had been served and cleared. A bowl of strawberries sat beside him. He had eaten none. That was unusual. I knew then that he was thinking. I gave him my notes. He read them without comment. The garden forms lines. Yes, the greenhouse, carriage house, east boundary, stone wall. Interesting. Mrs. Vance says Malcolm Bellamy instructed the family never to divide the garden. More interesting. The estate has been impossible to sell. Why? Disputed boundaries. He looked up. The flowers appeared overnight. Yes, all at once, apparently. Same stage of bloom? Almost exactly. Impossible naturally. Yes, artificially. Poof. How long would it take to arrange? I don't know. More than one night. Certainly. Unless the plants were grown elsewhere. He nodded. Good. You think someone prepared them? I think someone prepared the garden, then transported to your plant? Perhaps. That's a tremendous operation. Yes. Why would anyone go to that trouble? Wolfe returned to my notes. That is the first sensible question. I sat. There is something else. Go on. Mrs. Vance says someone has been trying to buy the estate. Name? Martin Bellamy. Wolfe looked interested. Relation? Family? Beneficiary? No. Then, what? Purchase unknown. Good. You're enjoying this. I am eating strawberries. You haven't touched them. He glanced at the bowl. They have become cold. I laughed. He ignored me. Did you notice anything else? The flowers. Aside from the flowers, the police found footprints. Where? Among the beds. Fresh? Some. Did you examine them? No. You will tomorrow. Anything particular? Everything. I waited. He added, and find out what the lines point toward. I already know. No. I mean I know where they point. That is not the same thing. What should I find? The reason. At 9 the next morning I was back at Bellamy Street. The crowd had grown. Someone had put up a temporary barricade. A newspaper truck blocked half the street. A television reporter was interviewing a man who claimed to have been a botanist for 27 years and was unable to identify the flowers correctly. I ignored them. Inside the estate, the morning light revealed something I had missed before. The flowers were not merely arranged in lines. Each line began at a different bed, and each line stopped at a specific object. The roses ended at the greenhouse, the irises at the carriage house, the lilies at the eastern wall. The poppies at the fountain. 4 destinations, 4 directions, 4 objects. I walked to the greenhouse. The structure had once been magnificent. Glass panes were broken. Iron supports rusted. Inside, dead vines covered old benches. But beneath the debris stood a stone pedestal. At its base was a brass plate. No inscription, only a number. I wrote it down. The carriage house contained another brass plate. The fountain had one. The eastern wall had one. Numbers. I looked back toward the flowers. The arrangement suddenly resembled a map. Not a garden, a map. I took photographs. Then I noticed something beneath the rosebed. A piece of blue ribbon, half buried in soil. I pulled it free. Attached to it was a small brass key. No larger than my thumb. I stared at it. Then at the greenhouse. The key had been planted with the flowers, or deliberately hidden beneath them. Either way, the garden had just become much more interesting. I returned to the house. Mrs. Vance met me in the hall. "You found something?" "Yes." She looked frightened. "What?" "A key. Where?" "Under the roses." Her face changed. "You must give it to me." That was an excellent reaction. "Why, I know what it opens." "What?" She swallowed. "The old greenhouse. There's a lock under the floor." "How do you know?" "My uncle told me." "When?" "Years ago." "What did he say?" She looked toward the study. "He said if the garden ever bloomed again, I should leave the property immediately." "Why?" "He wouldn't explain." "Did you obey?" "No." "Why not?" She looked at the flowers through the window. "Because I thought he was afraid of his own memories." "And now?" "I think he was afraid of someone else's." Before I could ask another question, the telephone rang. She answered. Her expression changed. She handed me the receiver. "For you." I took it. A man's voice said, "Mr. Goodwin." "Yes?" "Tell Wolfe to stay out of Bellamy Street." "Who am I speaking to?" "You know." "No, you will." The line went dead. I looked at Mrs. Vance. "That wasn't Martin Bellamy." "No. Who was it?" She didn't answer. Instead, she looked through the window, at the flowers, at the perfect lines, at the garden that had awakened in a single night. And I realized something. The flowers were not simply pointing toward 4 places. They were pointing toward 4 secrets. The only question was whether those secrets belonged to the dead, or to someone still alive. When I returned to Wolfe that afternoon, I put the brass key on his desk. He studied it. Then he looked at me. "You have found the beginning." I thought we'd already found the beginning. "No." He picked up the key. "This is the first deliberate clue." "What do you think it opens?" "The greenhouse." "Yes. And what is beneath it?" "I don't know." "Then tomorrow you will." He set the key down. "Mr. Goodwin." "Yes." "Do you remember the sentence Mrs. Vance used? The flowers aren't meant for us." "Yes." He looked toward the orchid room. She was correct. I frowned. The flowers were not planted for the family. No. For whom? Then Wolfe's expression became almost satisfied. Someone who knows how to read a garden. I looked again at the brass key. The garden had bloomed overnight. Its flowers formed lines. Its lines pointed toward hidden objects. The objects carried numbers. A key had appeared beneath the roses, and someone had already warned Nero Wolfe away. I had a feeling the Bellamy garden had been waiting 11 years to bloom. But I also had a stronger feeling that somebody had been waiting 11 years for Wolfe to notice why. Chapter 2. The Gardener Who Wasn't There. The trouble with a garden is that it has an unfortunate habit of looking innocent. A murder scene generally has the decency to provide a corpse. A burglary leaves a broken lock. A blackmail scheme leaves a nervous victim, an envelope, or at least somebody who suddenly develops an interest in changing telephone numbers. A garden gives you roses. The morning after the Bellamy garden bloomed, I was standing among enough roses to furnish every florist in Manhattan for a week, and I had no corpse, no broken lock, and no explanation. What I did have was a brass key in my pocket, a warning telephone call in my memory, and the increasingly unpleasant conviction that the flowers had been arranged to communicate with someone. I was not yet sure who. I was considerably less sure that I wanted to meet him. At 10 o'clock, I was back at number 17 Bellamy Street. The crowd outside had doubled. A newspaper photographer had stationed himself on a parked automobile for a better view over the iron fence. 2 women were arguing. about whether the flowers represented a religious symbol. A young man with a camera was explaining to anyone who would listen that he had studied horticulture for 6 months at a community college, and therefore knew more about the garden than the police. I went through the gate. A uniformed officer recognized me. "Goodwin, how's the botanical emergency? Getting worse? Any new developments?" He shook his head. "Except the flowers. Those are yesterday's flowers. They've opened more." I looked toward the beds. He was right. Several blossoms that had been partly closed yesterday had opened fully during the night. That bothered me. Did anyone enter after midnight? No. "You're certain? We've had an officer at the gate. Anyone leave?" No. "Then the garden changed by itself." He shrugged. "That's what the papers say. The papers also say the mayor is considering a garden festival. Wouldn't surprise me." I crossed the lawn. The geometry was even more obvious in daylight. The roses, the irises, the lilies, the poppies, 4 lines, 4 destinations, and each destination carried a number. I had photographed them the previous afternoon, but photographs did not tell me what I needed to know. I needed history. That was why I had come looking for the gardener. The official record said there hadn't been one. I intended to find him anyway. The first person I asked was Mrs. Vance. She met me in the study, wearing the same expression she had worn yesterday, only more tired. "I've been expecting you." "That's unfortunate. I suppose you found something else." "Several things." "Such as?" "The garden appears to have been maintained." She looked toward the windows. "By whom?" "That's what I'm trying to discover. No one has maintained it. Not officially." She became still. "What does that mean?" "It means I don't believe official records are telling me the whole truth." "Why?" "Freshly cut stems." Her face tightened. "Where?" 3 rose bushes near the eastern wall." "I didn't cut them." "I know." "Then perhaps the police did. The cuts were made before they arrived." She looked away. "Anything else?" "Recently turned soil." "Where?" "Under the irises. I haven't touched those beds." "Footprints." Her eyes returned to mine. "Where?" "Behind the greenhouse." "Until they disappeared." "How?" "Beneath an overgrown hedge." She was silent. "You know something." "No, that wasn't convincing. I don't know what you're asking." "Who maintained the garden?" She folded her arms. "No one." "You're sure?" "Yes, then someone has been trespassing, perhaps." "Why would a trespasser cultivate flowers?" She had no answer. I waited. She said, "There was a man." "What man?" "Years ago. Gardener, groundskeeper. Name?" "Samuel Price." "Where is he?" "I don't know." "Did he work for Malcolm Bellamy?" "Yes." "How long?" 20 years, perhaps." "Why did he leave?" That stopped me. "You said no one worked here for 11 years. No one officially did." "Mrs. Vance." She looked toward the door. "I was not involved in the management of the estate after my uncle died." "That isn't what I asked. He simply disappeared." "Samuel Price?" "Yes." "When?" "Shortly after the garden was closed." "Why?" "I don't know." "Did anyone report him missing?" "No." "Was he paid?" "Not after the estate was sealed." "Did he have family?" "I believe a daughter." "Where?" "Queens." I smiled. "That's considerably more useful than I don't know." She didn't smile back. "Mr. Goodwin." "Yes?" "Please understand something." "I am listening." "If Samuel Price has been here again, I want to know." "Why?" "Because my uncle feared him." That was interesting. "Why?" She shook her head. "He never told me." "Did he fear the man or what the man knew?" Her silence answered. I left the study with a new name in my notebook. Samuel Price. The gardener who officially didn't exist. Finding a retired groundskeeper in New York is easier than finding a retired groundskeeper who wants to discuss his former employer. Samuel Price turned out to live in a narrow brick apartment building in Queens, where the lobby smelled of floor polish and boiled cabbage. A woman in her 40s opened the door. "I'm looking for Mr. Price." "Why?" "Bellamy Estate." Her expression changed. "Who are you?" "Archie Goodwin." "From Wolfe?" "Yes." She opened the door wider. "My father is in the back." Samuel Price was 82. He sat beside a window overlooking an alley, wearing a grey cardigan and holding a newspaper. He had the hands of a working man, large knuckles, short nails. Hands that had spent decades cutting, planting, lifting, repairing. He looked at me once, then at his daughter. "Let him in." I entered. The daughter closed the door. "Mr. Price." "Goodwin, how did you know?" "Nobody else asks about dead gardens." Fair enough. He folded the newspaper. I saw the photograph. Of the flowers, yes. What did you think? I thought somebody had made a mistake. What kind? The kind that takes planning. That was exactly what I wanted. I sat. You worked at the Bellamy estate. I did. For how long? 26 years. Under Malcolm Bellamy. Yes. Did he know flowers? He knew everything except how to leave a gardener alone. I smiled. That sounds like affection. It was. What happened after his death? The garden was closed. Why? Family dispute. Over the property, among other things. Did you continue working there? Unofficially. I leaned forward. How long? Until the year after, then you stopped? No. Then what? He looked toward the window. I was told to stop. By whom? One of the family lawyers. Why? He said the garden was no longer to be touched. Did you obey? I did. Completely. He smiled faintly. No gardener ever completely obeys a garden. I liked him. What did you do? Nothing, Mr. Price. He looked at me. You've seen the photographs. Yes. What do you see? A garden. He thought about it. I see a message. That made two of us. Who planted it? I don't know. Could those flowers appear naturally? He gave me a look that suggested I had insulted both his intelligence and the plants. Not in 1,000 years. Why? The timing. What else? The selection. What else? The condition. Explain. Look at the roses. I age. Approximately. Not approximately. He reached for a pencil. These were cultivated together. How can you tell? Bud formation. He drew a small diagram on the back of an envelope. These blooms developed under controlled conditions. Greenhouse, likely. Then transported? Yes. How many plants? He laughed. Enough to make your question expensive. Thousands. Maybe more. Could one person do it? No. No. How many? He shrugged. A crew. Overnight, if the plants were prepared beforehand. Made a note. Mr. Price. Yes? Have you been back to Bellamy Street recently? No. Never. Not since the property was sealed. You're sure? He looked at me for several seconds. Then said, I have not walked through the front gate. That wasn't the same answer. Have you been near it? Once. When? 3 nights ago. Why? He hesitated. I saw lights inside the house? No. What kind? Small. Lantern? Candle. I stared. You saw someone? No. How long did the light remain? Maybe 10 minutes. Where? Near the greenhouse. I wrote it down. Did you go closer? No. Why not? He looked suddenly tired. Because I knew what they were looking for. What? He did not answer. Mr. Price. His daughter stepped forward. That's enough. He raised a hand. No. He looked at me. The garden was never only a garden. That's what I'm beginning to suspect. Malcolm knew. What did he know? That the property had been measured incorrectly. By whom? Surveyors. Why? Because somebody wanted certain pieces of land to appear somewhere they weren't. I sat very still. Fraud? Perhaps. You've seen the old plans? Yes. Do you still have copies? No. Where are they? He looked toward the ceiling. Hidden. Where? I don't know anymore. That answer was not satisfying. But before I could push further, he added something. The flowers know. What? He pointed toward my notebook. Those lines. Yes, they were drawn before. By whom? Malcolm. You're saying Malcolm Bellamy designed the pattern? No. He shook his head. He designed the garden so somebody could draw it later. I stared at him. What does that mean? It means the garden was built to be read. When I returned to the brownstone, Wolfe was in the dining room. Fritz had just served lunch. Wolfe was eating roast chicken with asparagus and a sauce, whose ingredients I would not have recognized if I had been allowed to inspect the kitchen. I waited until he had finished the first portion. Then I told him about Samuel Price. He listened without interruption. When I mentioned the greenhouse light, his knife stopped. 3 nights ago? Yes. The flowers appeared yesterday. Correct. Interesting. He also says the garden was designed to be read. Wolfe resumed eating. That is what I told you. You told me the flowers were a map. No, you said they formed lines. I said they should be read. Same difference. No, I sighed. What am I missing? The lines are not the message. They point to the message. Better. Then the destinations matter very much. I put the brass key on the table, which is why I found this. Wolfe looked at it. From beneath the roses. Yes. Have you tried it? What? Because you told me to bring it to you. Excellent. Where does it fit? The greenhouse? Probably. No. I blinked. Then where? The key itself tells you. I turned it over. Tiny numbers were stamped into the brass, the same 4 numbers. The flower lines. Yes, the brass plates. Yes, the key. Yes, all connected, obviously. To what? Wolfe looked at me. That is what you will discover. He returned to his meal. I waited. One more thing. Samuel Price says the flowers were cultivated together. Naturally. That means somebody prepared them. Yes. Probably in a greenhouse. Yes. Then moved them here. Yes. Which means the person responsible had access to a nursery, or possessed one. I stopped. You think there was another garden? I think there was a place where the flowers were prepared. Where? Find it. I picked up the key. You really enjoy giving orders. I enjoy avoiding unnecessary walking. Fair. That afternoon I returned to Bellamy Street with a tape measure, a flashlight, and the increasingly familiar sensation that I had volunteered for something considerably more complicated than a flower investigation. I started with the greenhouse. The door was locked. The lock itself was ancient. The key fit. It turned once, then twice. A mechanism beneath the floor clicked. Nothing else happened. I tried again. Still nothing. I examined the doorframe. A brass plate had been fitted beneath the handle. Number 17. I looked down. The floorboards inside the greenhouse formed a peculiar pattern. 3 long boards, 1 short, 3 long, 1 short. I photographed them. Then I noticed a narrow brass line running between 2 boards. I knelt. The line formed a rectangle. A trapdoor. I inserted the key. It fit perfectly. I turned it. Not dramatically. It rose 6 inches and stopped. Cold air came through the gap. Below was darkness and something else. The smell of soil, fresh soil. Not old, fresh. I lifted the panel. Narrow staircase descended beneath the greenhouse. The steps were stone. The walls were brick. At the bottom stood a room. A very old room. Shelves lined the walls. Empty flower trays covered the floor. Several clay pots remained stacked in one corner. But the room had not been abandoned. Someone had been using it. Recently, a metal watering can stood beside a table. The soil inside was damp. A pair of pruning shears rested on the table, freshly cleaned. On the far wall hung a large paper drawing. I approached. It was a map, not of the garden, of the estate. Property lines, buildings, measurements. 4 marked points, the same numbers. Below them someone had written, "Read from the garden." I stared at it. Then I heard a sound above me, a footstep. I turned, another. Someone was inside the greenhouse. I ran up the stairs. By the time I reached the top, the door was swinging. I burst outside. A figure disappeared behind the hedge. I chased him. The garden seemed suddenly enormous. Roses tore at my sleeves. Lilies bent beneath my hands. I reached the hedge. Nothing. Only a narrow opening. And beneath it, footprints. Fresh. They led toward the eastern wall, then stopped. Not because the person had vanished. Because the ground beyond the hedge was covered with old stone. I crouched. A small piece of green cloth lay in the dirt. I picked it up. Then I noticed something else. The footprints had been made by shoes with a distinctive narrow heel. The same pattern appeared in photographs taken near the rose beds. The gardener had returned, or someone wanted me to think he had. When I returned to Wolfe that evening, he was standing beside the orchid room door. He listened while I described the underground chamber. The flowers were prepared beneath the greenhouse, yes. The garden was designed as a map. The map contains 4 numbered points, yes. And somebody is still using the chamber, yes. Fresh shears, yes. Fresh soil, yes. Fresh footprints, yes. Wolfe nodded. Good. You keep saying that. Because you keep finding useful things. I also nearly caught somebody. Did you? No. Then you nearly caught somebody. I gave him the green cloth. He examined it. Cheap, yes. Deliberately. You mean the fabric has been cut from clothing, perhaps? Why? Deliberately. To leave a trace, I frowned. You think he wanted me to find it? I think whoever is arranging the garden understands investigators. Meaning? He knows that a mystery requires clues, so he planted them. Perhaps. Then, what do we trust? Wolfe looked toward the orchid room. Patterns, the flowers, the consistency behind them. He turned back to me. The flowers were not planted for beauty. I know. They were not planted to frighten the family. I know. They were not planted to mark a grave. Then what? He placed the green cloth beside. The brass key. They were planted to be read. I nodded. Read by whom? Someone who knows the old garden. Samuel Price? Perhaps? Malcolm Bellamy? Mrs. Vance? She does not know enough. Then who? Wolfe's eyes settled on the map I had brought from beneath the greenhouse. The person who knows what the numbers mean. I looked at the 4 points. The next step, he smiled faintly. Mr. Goodwin, we now know that the garden contains a message. And we have yet to determine what it says. He turned toward the dining room. Come. Fritz has prepared dinner. I followed him. Behind us, on the desk, the garden map remained open. 4 numbers, 4 destinations, 1 underground room, and a sentence written beneath the estate in a hand that was neither old enough to belong to Malcolm Bellamy nor careless enough to belong to an ordinary trespasser. Read from the garden. For the first, I understood that the flowers had not suddenly appeared because somebody wanted the neighborhood to look at them. They had appeared because somebody wanted one particular person to understand them. Chapter 3. The pattern beneath the flowers. There are 2 ways to look at a garden. The first is standing in it and wondering why somebody went to the trouble of planting so many flowers. The second is getting above it. Nero Wolfe preferred the second. This was inconvenient because Wolfe had no intention of getting above anything himself. At 8 the next morning, he handed me a camera. Go back to Bellamy Street. I was afraid you'd say that. Take photographs. I've taken photographs. From the ground. That is generally where photographs are taken, not useful ones. He pointed toward the camera. Find elevation. How high? High. Enough to see the pattern. No. Too expensive. Too noisy. A crane. Too conspicuous. Rooftop. Better. Which rooftop? Any. From which the entire garden is visible. I picked up my hat. Anything else? Yes. What? Do not allow the flowers to distract you. That's difficult. I left him with his orchids. That was how the morning began. By 10:30, I was standing on the roof of a 3-story building across Bellamy Street, with a camera around my neck and a landlord who wanted to know why a detective was photographing his neighbor's garden. I told him it was for botanical purposes. He did not believe me, neither did I. From the ground, the garden had looked artificial. From above, it looked deliberate. The difference was startling. The individual beds that had seemed merely narrow and decorative now formed long strokes across the property. White flowers created one line, yellow flowers created another. Red flowers cut diagonally across both. Purple and blue clusters filled spaces between them. The effect was crude but unmistakable. A map. I took photographs from every angle, straight down, north to south, east to west, from the neighboring roof, from a second-floor balcony, from a fire escape. By 11, I had enough images to make a respectable case against my own sanity. I returned to the brownstone. Wolfe had spread a large sheet of paper across his desk. Lange them. I have. How much? Enough. He examined the first photograph, then the second, then the third. He said nothing. That was worse than criticism. I placed the photographs side by side. From the ground, the lines point toward 4 locations. From above, they form a map. Yes. Of the surrounding streets. Yes. You could say something more. I am thinking. I noticed. He studied the photographs again. The garden occupied most of the paper. The surrounding streets appeared at the edges. Bellamy Street ran east to west. A narrower avenue crossed it. Another curved around the rear boundary. The flower beds did not reproduce the streets exactly. They reproduced them symbolically. A white line represented one road. A red cluster indicated an intersection. A yellow bed followed the outline of a block. At first glance, it seemed too crude to be useful. At second glance, it was too accurate to be accidental. Wolfe reached for a ruler. Measure this. I did. Now this. I measured again. The proportions are close. He pointed. Exact. I looked. The distance between 2 flower beds corresponded almost perfectly with the distance between 2 streets. The red flowers marked a corner. The white flowers marked a long boundary. The yellow flowers indicated another. I looked at Wolfe. Someone copied a city map into the garden. No, not a map. A property map. That distinction mattered. He pulled a second sheet toward himself. It contained the old estate survey I had found beneath the greenhouse. The garden isn't reproducing streets. He placed the survey beside the photograph. It is reproducing ownership. We spent the next hour comparing maps. The old Bellamy estate had once occupied a much larger section of the neighborhood. 30 years earlier, several adjoining properties had belonged to companies controlled by Thomas Bell and his business associates. The names appeared repeatedly. Warehouses, small apartment buildings, commercial lots, private residences. Some had since been sold, others demolished. A few had been divided into smaller parcels, but the old boundaries remained visible in the records. Wolfe marked each one. Here, he pointed to the first. Bell, Thomas Bell. Yes, another. Harold Crane, business partner. Yes, another. William Mercer, partner. Another. George Talbot, also a partner. The pattern grew. The flowers corresponded with properties connected to the same group of men. I stared at the photograph. Why, that is the question. They're all dead? Not all. Some descendants? Yes. Could this be a warning? Possibly a record? More likely. Evidence? Perhaps. I leaned closer. There's an empty patch. Paul's eyes moved to the photograph. Where? Here, I pointed. Between two rows of yellow flowers lay a rectangular section of bare ground. Not neglected, not overgrown, deliberately empty. Everything around it bloomed. The space did not. Measure it, Wolfe said. I did. 23 feet by 40. Compare. I placed the old survey beside it. The empty patch corresponded with a property boundary. Who owned it? I searched the records. Nobody listed. Again, I checked the property index. Nothing. No ownership record. Impossible, I agree. Every parcel had an owner. Apparently not this one. Look farther back. I did. Deeds, tax rolls, building permits. Nothing. The parcel existed physically. It existed on maps. It appeared in the garden. But it did not exist in the estate records. Wolfe leaned back. Excellent. I stared at him. You're pleased? Very. We've found a property that doesn't exist. Not quite. What? We have found a property that someone wanted to disappear. The blank parcel occupied a narrow section, behind Bellamy Street, squeezed between two properties that had once belonged to Bell's business partners. According to modern maps, it was part of a parking lot. According to older maps, it had once held a small brick building. According to the garden, it was important. According to the official estate records, it had never existed. I decided to visit it. The parking lot belonged to a furniture company. The manager was a broad man named Leonard Walsh, who did not appreciate detectives asking questions about his pavement. That lot has been here 20 years. What was here before? Nothing. Are you sure? He pointed toward the rear. Nothing. There's an old foundation. His expression changed. Where? Behind the fence. He stared at me. I've never seen it. You should. He followed me reluctantly. Behind the fence, partly buried beneath weeds, stood the remains of a brick structure. 3 walls, no roof, no door, a narrow stone staircase descending into darkness. I crouched beside the foundation, old brick, older than the parking lot, much older. Who owned this? Walsh shrugged. City. Land, I think. Think? That's what I was told. By whom? The previous owner. Name Arthur Dale. How long ago? Dead. 10. Family, don't know. I photographed the foundation. Then the stairs. The bottom step had been recently disturbed. The soil was loose. Someone had been there. I reached beneath the broken edge of the stair. My fingers touched metal. I pulled out a small iron box. Locked. I stared at it. Then I heard movement behind me. Walsh had disappeared. I stood. Mr. Walsh? No answer. I walked back toward the fence. The parking lot was empty. A car engine started somewhere beyond the building. By the time I reached the street, the car was gone. I returned to the brownstone carrying the locked box. Wolfe was in the office. He looked at the box. Where? Under a foundation. Which foundation? The missing property. His attention sharpened. Open it. I don't have the key. He examined the lock. Do you have the right to open it? No. Then don't. You expect me to carry it back? Yes. You enjoy this. I enjoy evidence. He placed the box beside the photographs. Tell me what happened. I did. He listened. When I mentioned the foundation, he looked at the garden photograph. Interesting. You're going to say, excellent. No. The missing property has a physical structure. Yes. The structure was removed from the records. Yes. The flowers. Identify it. Yes. Someone recently visited it. Yes. And you found a locked box. Yes. He nodded. Then the box is almost certainly irrelevant. I stared at him. Why? Because it was easy for you to find. Someone left it there. Exactly. So, if someone wanted to hide something, Why would he place it beneath a half-collapsed stair where an investigator could find it? To mislead us, perhaps. Then what matters? The thing they did not want you to notice. I looked at the photograph again. The garden, the empty patch, the property map. Something about the missing parcel. Yes. What? Wolfe pointed toward the photograph. Notice the flowers surrounding it. I examined them. White, yellow, red. The three colors converged at the empty space, but they did not cross it. The blank rectangle was not simply a missing garden bed. It was the center of the pattern. Everything pointed toward it. I looked at Wolfe. The empty property is the destination. No. The starting? No. Then what? The missing piece. Of what? The message. That afternoon I returned to Bellamy Street. Mrs. Vance was in the garden. She stood beside the white lilies holding a pair of gardening gloves. I stopped. You garden now? She looked at the gloves. I suppose I do. You said you hadn't touched anything. I haven't. Then why the gloves? She removed them slowly. I wanted to see what they felt like. Who's mine, Mrs. Vance? She sighed. You've discovered the pattern, yes. You've found the properties. Some. You've found the missing one. Yes. She looked at me. Then you know why the garden bloomed. No. You're close. Who owned the missing property? I don't know. Your uncle? No. One of his partners? No. Then who? She looked toward the empty patch. My uncle called it the blind lot. Why? Because nobody was supposed to know who owned it. Why? Because it was purchased through another company. Whose company? Don't know. Do you know the name? She hesitated. Bellamy Holdings. I frowned. That's your uncle's company. Exactly. Then he owned it. Officially and unofficially. She looked toward the house. There was another name. What name? I've seen it only once. Where? In Malcolm's study. On what? A letter. Who wrote it? I know. Who was it addressed to? Thomas Bell. Stared. Thomas Bell? She nodded. That's what makes no sense. I remembered the chapter's original records. Thomas Bell, the estate owner. The name had been written as Bellamy in family documents. Thomas Bell. Thomas Bellamy. Mrs. Vance. Yes? Was Thomas Bell really Thomas Bellamy? She looked frightened. I don't know. Did anyone ever explain the difference? No. Why didn't you ask? Because Malcolm burned the letter. How do you know? I saw him. Burn it? Yes. Then why remember it? Because before he burned it, he said something. What? She whispered. That property would someday tell the truth. That evening Wolfe was silent for a long time after hearing the story. He had removed his jacket and was sitting beneath the green lamp in his office. The photographs lay before him, the map, the property records, the notes about Thomas Bell, the mysterious missing parcel. He arranged the documents in a precise line. Thomas Bell, he said. Yes, not Thomas Bellamy. Apparently, family records, business records. Bell. Interesting. You think they are the same man. I think names are useful. That sounds ominous. They are useful because people assume they describe identity. He looked at me. Sometimes they describe ownership. I sat down. So the garden points to properties owned by his business partners. Yes. And the missing property was secretly owned by Bell. Yes. Then why hide it? That is the riddle. Could it be where the fraud occurred? Possibly. The underground chamber beneath the greenhouse? Part of the answer. The locked box? Probably a decoy. The flowers? A message. To whom? Wolfe's eyes returned to the photograph. Someone who knows that Thomas Bell and Thomas Bellamy were the same man. That's a small group. Not necessarily. Who would care? Anyone who inherited a property. That could be half the neighborhood. Exactly. He picked up the photograph. The garden is not accusing one man. What then? It is reconstructing a network of property, business partners, transactions, hidden ownership. And the missing parcel, the point where the network disappears. I looked at the empty patch. So that's what we're looking for, not the property. What then? The owner behind it. He put the photograph down. Find out who owned the blind lot. I'll start with the city. No. The tax office? No. County records? No. Then where? Wolfe pointed toward the garden map. Start with the 4 properties that surround it. I understood. The garden was not giving us the answer. It was giving us a sequence. 4 visible properties, 1 invisible property, 5 pieces of a transaction, and somewhere among them, 30 years of carefully buried history. I stood. Tomorrow, tonight. I looked at the clock. You're serious. Always. He reached for the telephone. Mr. Goodwin. Yes? Bring me every deed connected with those 4 properties. And if the records are missing, his eyes narrowed, then we shall know someone wanted them missing. I picked up my coat. The garden had begun as a miracle. It was becoming a ledger, and the strangest entry in that ledger was not a flower, a house, or a property. It was a piece of land that officially belonged to nobody, which meant, in my experience, that somebody probably wanted it very badly. Chapter 4. The property that wasn't there. There are many ways to make a piece of land disappear. You can build on it. You can pave over it. You can rename the street. You can change the boundaries. Or, if you possess sufficient patience and the cooperation of several men with official stamps, you can make the property disappear from the records while leaving the ground exactly where it was. That was the theory I carried with me when I left the brownstone at 8 the next morning. Nero Wolfe had supplied me with 4 fincemps, 6 addresses, 3 old maps, and 1 instruction. Find the missing property. He had said it as though the property were hiding beneath a newspaper. I had spent the previous evening studying the 4 parcels surrounding the blank section in the garden map. Everyone had once belonged to a company associated with Thomas Bell. Everyone had changed hands within a period of 3 years, and everyone had a suspicious gap in its records. The missing parcel was at the center. The 4 surrounding properties were the frame. I intended to find the picture. My first stop was the Municipal Property Archive. The clerk behind the counter was a thin young man named Peter Shaw, who had developed the admirable ability to look bored while surrounded by information that could ruin families. I gave him the old parcel references. He searched the computer, then the paper index, then the computer again. Nothing. Try the old numbering system. Those numbers aren't active. They were active 27 years ago. He looked at me. How do you know? Because I'm asking. He did not appreciate the answer. I gave him the map. He studied it. Where did you get this? From an estate. Which estate? Bellamy. He immediately became more careful. There's no parcel here. That's the problem. No. He pointed at the map. The problem is that your map is wrong. It isn't. Official maps say otherwise. That's why we're here. He leaned back. Let me check historical surveys. Please. He disappeared into a rear room. 20 minutes later he returned carrying a cardboard tube. This is the oldest survey we have. He unrolled it. The neighborhood appeared in faded black ink. Streets, buildings, property numbers. There it was. The missing parcel. A narrow rectangular lot behind Bellamy Street. Marked lot 118. I pointed. That's it. Peter nodded. Past tense, officially. What happened? He pulled another map from the tube. This is 27 years later. The lot was gone. Not sold. Not divided. Gone. The neighboring properties had expanded. Their boundaries had shifted inward. The space between them disappeared. Boundary adjustment, Peter said. Authorized by whom? He checked the notation. City Survey Office. Surveyor? Arthur Wren. I wrote the name. Where is he? Retired? Alive? I think so. Address? He hesitated. That's not public. I smiled. Everything becomes public when you ask the right person. He looked at me for several seconds, then wrote an address on a scrap of paper. Arthur Wren lived in a narrow house in Queens surrounded by rose bushes that appeared to have been planted without the assistance of criminals. He was 91. He answered the door himself. When I mentioned lot 118, he closed the door. I knocked again. Mr. Wren. No answer. I knocked. Mr. Wren, I'm Archie Goodwin. Sites work for Nero Wolfe. The door opened. He stared at me. Come in. The house smelled of old books and furniture polish. Wren moved slowly, but without assistance. He led me to a study filled with rolled maps. You know about Bellamy? Enough. Then you know not to ask questions. That is precisely why I am here. He looked at me. Who sent you, Wolfe? Then you're already too late. Too late for what? He sat. I remained standing. Lot 118. It existed. Yes. You removed it from the maps. I altered a boundary. That's not the same thing. It became the same thing. Why? He stared at the window. Orders. From whom? People above me. Names? No. Thomas Bell? His expression changed. That was enough. Yes. Bellamy? No. Thomas Bell? That's what he called himself. Was he the owner? Not on paper. Who was? Wren looked at me. That's why the parcel disappeared. I waited, he continued. The property was purchased through a holding company. Bell's company? One of them. Why conceal it? Because the lot wasn't supposed to be part of the development. What was it? A warehouse. Used for storage. He shook his head. Records. My attention sharpened. Business records. Property records. Whose? Several companies. Bell's? Yes. His partners? Yes. Why store them there? Because nobody was supposed to know the warehouse belonged to Bell. Yet you knew. I surveyed it. Who else knew? Bell. The partners? Some the city? Officially. Unofficially. He smiled bitterly. New York is full of unofficial knowledge. I took out my notebook. What happened 27 years ago? Bell wanted the lot erased. Why? Because he was selling properties that he did not legally own. I stared. Explain. The warehouse contained documents showing how the ownership had been transferred. Fraud, that's the word. Did you see the documents? Yes. What happened to them? They were removed. By Bell? I don't know. Then why did the lot disappear? Because once the lot vanished from the maps, nobody would ask what had been stored there. Who ordered you to change the boundaries? He closed his eyes. I was given a map. By whom? A lawyer. Name? He did not answer. I waited. Finally he said Daniel Cross. I wrote it down. Did Cross represent Bell? Yes. Where is he now? Dead. Convenient. Not for him. I looked at the old surveyor. Mr. Wren, yes. Why are you telling me this now? He smiled faintly. Because I'm 91. That was the most convincing answer I had heard all week. I returned to Bellamy Street shortly after sunset. The estate looked different at night. The house was dark. The garden glowed beneath temporary security lamps. The flowers seemed almost luminous. The 4 lines remained visible. The empty central patch remained untouched. I stood beside the rose bed and studied the arrangement. White, yellow, red, 3 colors, 3 lines, 3 beds, converging toward the missing property. I understood now why Wolfe had wanted me to identify every property. The garden was not merely a map. It was a record of ownership. The flowers showed where Bell's network had extended. The empty parcel showed where the evidence had been stored. And the 3 beds around it formed a warning. Someone had built a message out of living things. At 10:30 I left. At 11:15 the police called. Someone had entered the estate. I returned immediately. The damage was startling, not because it was extensive, because it was precise. 3 flower beds had been destroyed. Only 3. The white lilies, the yellow irises, the red poppies, everything else remained untouched. The roses, hydrangeas, foxgloves, poppies elsewhere. The greenhouse, the fountain, the orchard, nothing else. Whoever had entered the garden had walked directly to the 3 beds, forming the central pattern, and destroyed them. Plants had been torn from the soil. Stems snapped, flowers crushed, the ground scattered, but no other part of the garden had been disturbed. Officer Daniels met me at the gate. You see why I called? Yes. Someone knew exactly what to destroy. Yes. How? I looked across the garden. Because they were looking at the same map. He frowned. What map? The flowers. He looked at me as if considering whether I needed medical attention. I walked to the ruined beds. The destruction was fresh. Boot prints crossed the soil, one set. The same narrow heel pattern I'd seen before. The gardener, or the man pretending to be the gardener. I crouched. The flowers had been torn out violently, but beneath the roots something remained. A strip of paper. I pulled it free. It was laminated, old. A fragment of a property survey. Lot 118. I stared. The intruder had not merely destroyed the flowers. He had exposed the evidence beneath them. I stood. Daniels. Yes? Don't let anyone touch this area. Why? Because whoever did this may have made a mistake. What kind? They destroyed the message. I held up the survey fragment. But they revealed the answer. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened while I described the destruction. He sat behind his desk with his hands folded. I placed the survey fragment before him. He studied it. Then looked at the photograph of the garden. 3 beds, yes. White, yes. Yellow, yes. Red, yes. The 3 colors forming the boundary. Exactly. Destroyed, yes. By someone who knew their significance, yes. He nodded. Good. I laughed. You really enjoy that word. It is an appropriate word. Someone just destroyed half the clue.
No.
He looked at me. Someone confirmed it. I stopped. How? Had the flowers been decorative? Why destroy only 3? Because they were looking for something. Precisely. They knew those beds mattered. Yes. So they knew the pattern. Yes. And if they knew the pattern, they knew The secret. I sat. The missing property. Lot 18. The warehouse. The records. Yes. The fraudulent ownership. Exactly, I leaned back. Then the intruder just confirmed everything. Not everything. What remains? The identity. The person who destroyed the beds. Yes. Samuel Price? Perhaps. Thomas Bellamy's descendants? Possibly. Someone connected to the old business? Likely. Wolfe picked up the survey fragment. Observe. What? The paper was hidden beneath the flowers? Yes. Why? To protect it? No. He turned it over. Look. The reverse side contained a handwritten number. 42. The fountain, yes. And the garden line, yes. One of the 4 original markers. I stared. So the intruder was not searching blindly. No. He knew where to look. Precisely, which means someone told him. Or he was there when the garden was created. I frowned. 27 years ago? Perhaps that would make him old. Not necessarily. The secret could have been inherited. Yes, like the documents. Exactly. He returned the fragment to the desk. Mr. Goodwin. Yes, the garden is no longer merely revealing a secret. It is. No. He looked toward the orchids. It is revealing that someone has spent decades concealing it. That distinction mattered. A hidden fact could be forgotten. A concealed fact required effort. Someone had changed maps. Someone had erased a property. Someone had hidden records. Someone had preserved the garden. Someone had now destroyed 3 beds to prevent us from reading it. This was no longer a mystery about flowers. It was a struggle between 2 people who knew the same secret. One wanted it uncovered. The other wanted it buried again. I looked at Wolfe. Then the question is, who planted the garden? No. Who hid the documents? No. Who erased lot 118? No. I waited. Wolfe smiled faintly. The useful question is this. What? Who became frightened when the garden bloomed? I thought of Mrs. Vance, Samuel Price, Martin Bellamy, the missing warehouse, the dead surveyor's lawyer, the unknown caller, the 3 destroyed beds. Suddenly the garden seemed crowded with suspects, and somewhere among them was the person who had spent 27 years believing that lot 118 had disappeared forever, until the flowers brought it back. Got Chapter 5. The ledger beneath the greenhouse. By the time I reached Bellamy Street the next morning, the 3 destroyed flower beds had become the principal attraction. Reporters photographed them. Neighbors speculated about vandals. A botanist from Colombia had arrived to explain that the damage was botanically selective, which was a phrase I intended to remember for future conversations with people who charged by the hour. The police had put a rope around the beds. That did not stop anyone from trying to look. I stood outside the greenhouse and watched the crowd for several minutes. Then I noticed Samuel Price. He was on the opposite side of the street. He did not approach the estate. He did not look at the reporters. He looked at the greenhouse. When our eyes met, he turned away. I crossed the street. He waited. "You've been following me," he said. "I was going to accuse you of the same thing." "I'm too old for following. You're 82, not 182. Some mornings feel like it." He looked toward the ruined flower beds. 3, yes. They found the place. Who? He didn't answer. The greenhouse? He looked at me. "You've been inside." "Yes." "You found the lower room?" "Yes." His face tightened. "Then you know." "I know there is a room beneath the greenhouse. You shouldn't have gone there." "I've heard that before." "What did you find?" "A map." "Anything else?" "Nothing." He looked relieved. That was the first mistake he made. I said, "Lying." He looked at me sharply. "Why?" "Because you were relieved." He smiled without humor. "Mr. Goodwin, if I knew what was down there, I wouldn't be standing here." "Who does?" He looked toward the Bellamy house. "Someone who has been waiting a long time." "Who?" "Ask the garden. The garden doesn't talk. Neither did Malcolm." That stopped me. "What do you mean?" Samuel Price turned toward the estate. "Your employer will understand." Then he walked away. I watched him go. There was something in his manner I disliked. Not fear, not guilt, resignation. As if he had already seen the ending and was merely waiting for everyone else to catch up. I returned to the greenhouse. The police had finished examining the damaged beds. The interior was quiet. The flowers had transformed the ruined structure from an abandoned greenhouse into the center of an investigation. I descended beneath the floor again. The underground chamber looked exactly as I had left it. The map remained on the wall, the 4 numbers, and beneath them, "Read from the garden." I examined the walls. Nothing. The shelves. Nothing. The floor. Nothing. Then I remembered the foundation line I had noticed on the old municipal plan. It did not match the present walls. The original greenhouse had been larger. The northern foundation extended nearly 12 feet beyond the current structure. I found the old line beneath layers of dirt and broken brick. That meant part of the original room had been sealed. I began digging. I had a shovel after 10 minutes. By 15 minutes I had ruined my shirt. By 20 I had found a brick wall. By 25 I had found a metal ring. I pulled. Nothing. I pulled harder. A section of brick shifted. Behind it was a narrow cavity, and inside that cavity was a box. Not the iron box I had found beneath the missing property's foundation. This one was wooden, small, blackened with age. The lid carried a brass plate. No name, only a date. 27 years earlier, I brought it into the light. The lock had already been broken. Inside was a ledger. The leather cover was cracked. The pages had yellowed. A thin layer of dust covered the edges. I opened it. The first entries appeared disappointingly ordinary. Rose cuttings, lily bulbs, seed packets, fertilizer, soil, glass panels, copper tubing, garden tools, quantities, dates, names. Nothing that seemed worth hiding. I turned several pages, still ordinary. Then I noticed the numbers. An entry read, white roses, 17 units. Another yellow iris, 31 units. Other poppies, 42 units. Another lily stock, 6 units. I stopped. The numbers matched the garden markers, but the quantities were absurd. 17 roses, 31 irises, 42 poppies, 6 lilies. Those were not measurements. They were references. I photographed the pages and closed the ledger. Then I noticed another notation. A series of quantities beside shipments, 17 by 24, 3 by 42, 6 by 18, 42 by 23. I stared. Those looked less like gardening records. They looked like dimensions. I opened my notebook. The missing property measured approximately 23 feet by 40 feet. One of the ledger entries contained 42 by 23. My pulse quickened. The garden was using numbers as a language, not merely identifying properties, encoding dimensions. I turned more pages. The names began to appear. Thomas Bell, Harold Crane, William Mercer, George Talbot, Daniel Cross. There they were. The businessmen, the lawyer, the men whose names had appeared in the old property records. But the ledger gave them new associations. Each shipment of garden materials corresponded with a property. Each quantity matched a boundary measurement. Each date coincided with a transfer. I had seen enough. I climbed upstairs and called Wolfe. He answered on the second ring. Yes, I found the ledger. Silence. Then, where? Under the greenhouse. Bring it. I am. Do not show it to anyone. I wasn't planning to. Mr. Goodwin. Yes? Come directly home. I did. Wolfe was waiting in the office. Fritz had just brought him tea. I placed the ledger on the desk. Wolfe did not touch it immediately. He examined the cover, the spine, the brass plate, the stitching. Then he opened it. His eyes moved across the first page, then the second. He turned faster. By the 5th page, he was no longer reading like a man examining garden accounts. He was reading like a man who had finally found the missing piece of a machine. How many pages? 187. Entry? Most are routine. No. He turned the ledger toward me. Nah, routine. I sat. What do you mean? Observe the quantities. I did. They are not quantities. Measurements. Yes. Property dimensions, some. Then what are the others? Distances. Between properties. Precisely. He reached for a ruler. Within minutes, he had reconstructed the first sequence. The measurements corresponded with the old Bellamy holdings. One parcel. Another. A third. Then the missing warehouse. The ledger had converted property boundaries into the language of gardening. Flowers became numbers. Numbers became measurements. Measurements became ownership. The garden was not a map. It was a ledger written in living things. I leaned back. That's clever. It is more than clever. Why? Because it survived. What? The records. He tapped the ledger. The original documents could be destroyed, the maps altered, the deeds concealed. But the garden would disappear eventually, not if someone rebuilt it. Exactly. He turned another page. There were dates. One caught his attention. Read this. I leaned closer. The entry was short. Transfer completed. Boundary adjusted. Warehouse retained under separate account. Beneath it appeared a number, 118 lot 1. I looked at Wolfe. The missing property. Yes. And the warehouse. Yes, someone recorded the fraud, not merely recorded it. He turned another page. The ledger identifies the mechanism. False boundaries, disguised transfers, properties moved between companies, payments disguised as landscape expenses. Why landscaping? Because nobody questions shipments of soil and plants to wealthy estates. I laughed. Apparently they should. Wolfe did not smile. He had reached a page near the middle there, with 5 names: Thomas Bell, Harold Crane, William Mercer, George Talbot, Daniel Cross. Beside each name appeared a series of numbers. Under Bell, 173142 118 under Crane, 311422 under Mercer, 42819 under Talbot, 61227 under Cross. 118. I stared. Cross only has the missing lot. Exactly, the lawyer. Yes, so the warehouse belonged to Cross, not legally. Then why his number? Because he controlled the transfer. That explains why. Wren remembered him. Wolfe nodded. The lawyer was the mechanism. Bell was the owner. Bell was the beneficiary. Then who was Cross? The man who made ownership appear legitimate. I looked at the ledger. And the garden. Wolfe closed it. The garden was created by someone who knew all of this. Samuel Price? Perhaps. Who else? That is what we must discover. I returned to Bellamy Street that afternoon. The garden looked wounded. 3 beds were gone. The surviving flowers appeared almost accusatory. I walked toward the greenhouse. Samuel Price was waiting there. You found it, he said. The ledger, he nodded. You knew. I knew there was a record. Did you put it there? No. Who did? He looked toward the ruined beds. The person who knew the garden would be destroyed. When? Before it bloomed. That makes no sense. It does if you know Malcolm. Thomas Bell. Samuel stared at me. Don't use that name here. Why? Because Malcolm Bellamy was a name he chose. Thomas Bell was the real name, yes. Why'd he change it? Samuel looked away. Because his father had another name. I waited. He said nothing more. Mr. Price, enough. No. I stepped closer. You told me Malcolm knew about the hidden property. I told you he knew. You told me the garden was built to be read. Yes. Who built it? Not me. Then who? He looked at me. A woman. Who? I won't say. Why? Because she is dead. That doesn't prevent you from saying her name. It does if her name is the reason other people are alive. That was not an answer. It was a warning. I'd left him there. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe had reached a conclusion. I knew because the orchids had been neglected. Wolfe never neglected his orchids without an excellent reason. He was standing in the office with the ledger open before him. I have reconstructed the transactions. All of them? Enough. He showed me a sheet of paper. On it he had drawn a chain. Bell, Crane, Mercer, Talbot, Cross, 5 men, 5 groups of properties. 1 hidden warehouse. The scheme lasted approximately 6 years, he said. How much land? Enough to make the effort worthwhile. Millions, several $1 million in today's value. And nobody discovered it? Someone did. Who? That is the essential question. Sat. The garden, yes. Created by someone who knew, yes. Then why wait 27 years? Because evidence without opportunity is merely history. And now the properties are being sold. That explains the recent interest. Exactly. Someone wants the old secret buried before ownership changes again. Wolfe nodded. And someone else wants it exposed. The garden, yes. The person who rebuilt it. Precisely. I looked at the ledger. Why use flowers? Because a written message can be destroyed. A garden can be destroyed too. But not without revealing that someone fears it. He closed the ledger, which is what our visitor has done. The 3 beds, yes. He confirmed the importance of the pattern. More importantly, he confirmed that someone is watching. I thought of the mysterious telephone call, the footsteps, the green cloth, Samuel Price, the ruined flower beds, the hidden ledger. Everything seemed connected. Yet one fact remained stubbornly outside the pattern. Who created the garden? Wolfe looked toward the window. I believe we are about to meet that person. Why? He pointed to the ledger. Because this was not the final record. What? Look at the last page. I opened it. The final entry contained no quantities, no shipment, no property number, only one sentence. When the garden blooms, the ogre will come. Below it was a date. Tomorrow, I stared. That's tomorrow. Yes, then somebody knew exactly when this would happen. No, Wolfe looked at me. Somebody arranged it. I read the sentence again. When the garden blooms, the owner will come. The owner of what? That, Wolfe said, is the question. I closed the ledger. The garden had begun as an impossible display of flowers. It had become a map. The map had led to a missing property. The missing property had led to a warehouse. The warehouse had led to a ledger. And the ledger had led us to a sentence written 27 years ago by someone who expected the garden to bloom again. Tomorrow, according to that sentence, the owner would come. The only difficulty was that we still did not know which owner. And in New York, when several people claim the same piece of property, the one with the strongest claim is not necessarily the one holding the deed. Sometimes it is the one who knows where the bodies of the old lies are buried. In this case, I had a feeling the flowers were about to tell us exactly where. Chapter 6. The man who wanted the garden cut down, Arthur Mason, arrived at the Bellamy estate with a pair of city men, a folder of legal papers, and the expression of a man who had discovered that nature had become inconvenient. I was standing beside the ruined greenhouse when his automobile stopped at the gate. He got out slowly. He was perhaps 70, tall and narrow, with silver hair combed carefully backward, and the sort of expensive coat that seemed designed less for warmth than for reminding everyone who paid for it. I knew his name before he introduced himself. Arthur Mason, Bell's former solicitor, or more precisely, the solicitor who had represented Thomas Bell during the final years before the Bellamy estate changed ownership. He looked at the flowers. His face showed nothing. That was the first thing I noticed. Most people seeing the garden for the first time reacted. They stared. They asked questions. They photographed it. They smiled. They laughed. Mason merely looked. Then he said, "This has gone far enough." I stepped toward him. "Good morning." He turned. "Mr. Goodwin, you know me?" "I know Mr. Wolfe." "That usually happens. I've heard you're investigating the estate, investigating the flowers. They're weeds." I looked at the white lilies surrounding us. "Expensive weeds. They are damaging the property." "How?" "Roots, those lilies." "All of it." He gestured toward the garden. "It must be removed." I smiled. "You're a solicitor, not a gardener." "I know enough about property to understand that an abandoned garden lowers its value." "Then why is everyone outside taking photographs?" "Publicity is not value. You want it cut down immediately." "Why?" "Because the estate is being prepared for sale." "To whom?" "That is not your concern." "It may become my concern." His eyes hardened. "I don't believe Mr. Wolfe has any authority here." "He doesn't." "Then why are you here?" "Because someone keeps calling him." "Mrs. Vance?" "Among others." He looked toward the house. "Vance has no authority to retain investigators. She can retain whoever she likes. Not if the estate is under legal settlement." "That sounds like a legal problem." "It is." "Then you're in the right profession." He did not smile. "The garden will be removed." "Who authorized that?" "I did." "On what authority?" He opened his folder. "I represent interests connected with the estate." "Which interests?" "That is confidential." "Convenient." He closed the folder. "I advise you to stay out of this. I've been advised to do worse." He turned toward the two men who had accompanied him. "Begin with the western beds." I stepped in front of them. "No." Mason stared. "You have no authority to stop them." "Perhaps." "Then move." I did not. After a moment he said, "Goodwin, you are making a serious mistake." "I've made several. This one may have consequences. Most interesting mistakes do." He turned away. The two men remained where they were. Mason looked back once at the flowers. His expression was still controlled, but his eyes had changed. They were no longer irritated. They were afraid. That was more useful than anything he had said. I telephoned Wolfe from the estate office. "Mason is here." "Arthur Mason?" "The same. What does he want?" "The garden destroyed." A pause. "Immediately." "Yes." "Interesting. He says it's damaging the property." "Is it?" "No." "Good. He brought men to cut it down. Prevent them. Already done. Without violence. Naturally." "Excellent. He claims legal authority. Does he possess it?" "I don't know." "Find out." "I'll ask." "No. You don't want me to ask?" "I want you to determine whether he has authority without asking him." "That's much more fun. It is also more reliable." I looked through the office window. Mason stood beside his car, speaking on the telephone. "He keeps looking at the greenhouse." "Did he enter?" "No." "Did he look at the flower beds?" "Yes." "Which ones?" I watched him. "The surviving ones." "Which?" "The roses." "Anything else?" "The 3 damaged beds." Wolfe was silent. Then he said, Mr. Goodwin. Yes? Do not allow him to remove anything. Flowers? Anything. The legal position turned out to be exactly as Wolfe suspected. Mason had authority to advise certain beneficiaries. He did not possess authority to destroy the garden without consent from the estate trustees. Mrs. Vance had not given consent. Neither had the other beneficiaries. The two men accompanying Mason were dismissed. Mason remained. That was his second mistake. I found him in the study, examining old photographs. You don't have authority to cut the garden. I've been informed. You seem disappointed. I am concerned. About property value, about liability. From flowers, from an unsafe garden. That's not what you said. He looked at me. I said what I needed to say. Why are you so interested in removing it? I've already explained. Not convincingly. He placed the photograph down. You are young, Goodwin. I've heard that. You think every pattern conceals a conspiracy. No. Yet you have found one in flowers. I found numbers. Numbers can be arranged accidentally. Not these. He smiled thinly. Then perhaps you have found a coincidence. That would be impressive. Why? Because the flowers correspond with properties once controlled by Thomas Bell. His face changed. Only slightly. Enough. That name means nothing to me. You were his solicitor. I represented many clients. Bell? No. Thomas Bell? No. Thomas Bellamy? Yes. Interesting. What? You answered one and not the other. He stared at me. Bellamy was my client. Bell? I don't know the name. That's unfortunate. Why? Because I have a ledger with it. His expression froze. For the first time, the man looked genuinely frightened. I let the silence continue. Then I said, You know what the garden is showing? No. You know about lot 118? No. You know the old warehouse? No. You know the boundary changes? No. Then why do you want the garden destroyed? He looked toward the window. I told you.
Yeah.
Yes. Because it damages the property. That is still a poor lie. He turned sharply. Be careful. About what? Accusing a man without evidence. I haven't accused you. You've implied. I've observed. He stared at me. Then he picked up his coat. Tell Wolfe I advised him to abandon this matter. Tell him. Do that. He left. I watched his car disappear. Then I went upstairs to the study. Mr. File. You saw him, yes. Did he say anything? Enough. She looked worried. The garden destroyed. She closed her eyes. Of course. Why? I don't know. Mrs. Vance. She hesitated. There was a time when my uncle trusted him. Arthur Mason? Yes. Did Mason handle the property transfers? Some. 118? I don't know. You're not telling me everything. I don't know. What is safe to tell you? That is different. She looked at me. You found the ledger. It wasn't a question. Yes. Then you understand. I understand that someone used garden records to conceal property measurements, and the scheme involved Thomas Bell. Her expression tightened. Don't say that name loudly. We're alone. You don't know who is listening. I looked around the room. You think the house is watched? I think the estate has been watched for 27 years. By whom? She shook her head. People who were afraid the old map would return. I stared. Who told that? My mother. When? Years ago. What did she mean? She sat. My mother told me that Malcolm once warned her never to trust a solicitor who knew too much about the garden. Mason? I don't know. Did she mention the map? She mentioned something else. What? She looked toward the windows. Something Malcolm said. What? She repeated it carefully. When the garden blooms, the old map will return. I felt the hairs rise along my arms. Those exact words? Yes. Where did he say them? At the Who was present, my mother? Anyone else? I stared. Your mother told you this? Yes. When? After Malcolm died. Why wait? Because she was afraid. Of Mason? Of everyone. That answer explained more than she knew. I returned to the brownstone after dark. Wolfe was in his office. The ledger was open. He had placed the garden photograph beside it. Mason's name was already written on a sheet of paper. I see you have anticipated me. I have been thinking. That is usually dangerous. Rarely I told him about Mason, the demand to destroy the garden, the claim of property damage, his denial of knowing Thomas Bell, his reaction when I mentioned the ledger. Then I repeated Mrs. Vance's account. When the garden blooms, the old map will return. Wolfe did not move. Again, I repeated it. He closed his eyes. For nearly a minute he remained silent. Then he opened them. That is the sentence. What struction? From the ledger? Perhaps. The old map. Not a paper map. What then? He turned the garden photograph toward me. The garden itself. I frowned. Explain. 27 years ago, someone knew the land records would be altered. Yes. Someone preserved the measurements. In the ledger. Yes. Then why create a garden? Because a ledger can be found. The garden can too. Not for 27 years. Until now. Exactly, he pointed to the photograph. The garden was designed as a permanent cipher. Using flowers, using living landmarks. Why? Because the arrangement could be recreated from memory. But flowers die, which is why the message required maintenance. Samuel Price, possibly. Someone kept the design alive. Yes. Then why let the garden appear all at once? Because the time had come. What time? The property was being sold. The hidden land records would become relevant. Exactly. Wolfe reached for the ledger. The creator knew that once the estate entered another ownership dispute, the old boundaries would be examined. So the garden was a final record, yes. A record that forced investigators to compare the old property map with the current one, yes. And that exposes Lot Ain, yes. And the fraud, yes. I sat back. Then Mason wants it destroyed because he knows what happens if we finish reading it. Wolfe nodded. He is not afraid of flowers. He is afraid of records. Precisely. The next morning, another witness appeared. He came to the brownstone shortly after 9. I recognized him as soon as I opened the door. Harold Mercer, the retired newspaper editor I had interviewed earlier. He had been one of the names appearing in the old property records. Now he looked considerably less composed. Mr. Goodwin, Mr. Mercer, I need to speak with Mr. Wolfe. Come in. He entered slowly. Wolfe received him in the office. Mercer removed his hat. I should have told you this earlier. Wolfe gestured toward the chair. Why did you not? Fear. Of whom? Mercer looked toward me. Arthur Mason. Wolfe said nothing. Mercer continued. 27 years ago, I was invited to Bell's office. Thomas Bell? Yes. Why? He wanted a newspaper story. Stopped. About what? Property transfers. Wolfe leaned forward slightly. What did you discover? That several properties had changed boundaries overnight, similar to Lot 118. Exactly. What happened? Bell told me the records were legitimate. You believed him? I did not. Then he threatened to ruin the paper. Mercer gave a tired smile. He nearly succeeded. What else? Before I left, he said something. What? Mercer looked directly at Wolfe. When the garden blooms, the old map will return. The room became very still. Why did he say that? I asked. I don't know. Was the garden present? No, it was dead. It was neglected. Then why mention it? I assumed it was a metaphor. Wolfe shook his head. It was an instruction. Mercer looked at him. To whom? To the future. After Mercer left, Wolfe stood and walked toward the orchid room. I followed. He stopped before a cluster of white orchids. The garden was designed by someone who understood evidence. Not flowers, evidence. Someone wanted the old property map restored. Yes. Why didn't they simply preserve the documents? Because documents can be destroyed. The ledger survived. One ledger. Others, possibly destroyed. So the garden became a backup. More than that. What? A public challenge. I looked at him, meaning anyone could see it, but only someone who knew the history could read it. Exactly. And Mason knows. Yes, which means he isn't merely protecting Bell's secret. No. He is protecting himself. Wolfe nodded. Now we have motive. For what? For destroying the garden. And for what happened 27 years ago. That remains. He looked at me. But we are closer. That evening I returned to Bellamy Street. The garden was quiet. The surviving flowers stood beneath the moonlight. The 3 destroyed beds formed black scars across the otherwise perfect arrangement. I walked to the greenhouse. Someone had left the door open. Inside, the underground chamber was dark. I descended. The ledger was gone. I froze. The wall where the map had hung was empty. The 4 numbered markers had disappeared. Someone had entered after us. Someone had taken the final evidence. I hurried upstairs. A figure stood beyond the greenhouse. I ran. He ran too. Across the garden, past the fountain, toward the eastern wall. I gained on him. He turned. For one instant I saw his face. Arthur Mason. He threw something over the wall and disappeared through a narrow opening. I climbed after him. Too late. The street beyond was empty. I returned to the garden. The object he had thrown lay in the grass. A small leather notebook. I opened it. Inside were names, dates, payments, property numbers. And on the final page, written in a hand I recognized from the ledger, Mason knows where the last map is. I stared at it. The garden had given us the ledger. The ledger had given us the network. Mason had tried to destroy the garden. Now he had stolen the map. But whoever created the record had anticipated him. Even the destruction had been accounted for. When I returned to the brownstone, Wolfe read the notebook without surprise. Mason took the map and left this. Yes, deliberately. Why? Because the final map is elsewhere. Where? He looked toward the orchids. That is what Arthur Mason is going to lead us to. I sat down. So he has made a mistake. Several. Which one matters? Wolfe closed the notebook. He has admitted that the map exists, and he has also admitted that he knows where it is. I smiled. And if he knows where it is, Wolfe looked toward the dark window. Then he knows who created the garden. The room fell silent. Outside, the city moved through another warm summer night. Inside, the mystery had finally acquired a human shape. Arthur Mason no longer wanted the garden destroyed because it damaged property. He wanted it destroyed because every flower was a witness. Every surviving bed pointed toward a buried transaction. Every number challenged a false boundary. Every blossom restored a piece of an old map. And somewhere in New York, hidden for 27 years, lay the original record that could prove exactly how Thomas Bell had turned stolen land into legitimate property. The garden had not merely returned the map. It had forced the man who feared it most to reveal that he knew where the map had gone. For Wolfe, that was enough. For me, it meant tomorrow was going to be busy. Chapter 7. Wolfe reads the garden. By 8 o'clock the following morning, Nero Wolfe had converted his office into something between a surveyor's headquarters and a horticultural laboratory. Maps covered the desk. The old ledger lay open beside them. Photographs of the Bellamy garden were pinned to a large board. Property deeds occupied one chair. Copies of municipal surveys occupied another. The brass key rested beside Wolfe's coffee cup. He had also requisitioned 3 orchid trays from the plant rooms, which I considered proof that the investigation had finally reached the point at which Wolfe's orchids were being used as evidence. I entered carrying another folder. More records. Put them there. Where? Anywhere they will not interfere. I looked around. There wasn't such a place. Wolfe. The garden has been partially destroyed. I am aware the ledger was stolen. I am aware. Mason is running around with the missing map. I am aware. Then why do you look pleased? I have stopped looking for the map. I stared at him. You've stopped? Yes. Why? Because I have reconstructed it. I looked at the board. Lines covered it. Street intersections, property boundaries, measurements, names, dates, numbers. At the center was Lotta 18. That looks like a map. It is. The original? No. The reconstruction. From the garden? From the garden, the ledger, the municipal surveys, and Thomas Bell's final instructions. I dropped into a chair. You found his instructions? No. Then how do you know them? I know what he intended. That's a dangerous distinction. Only if one is careless. He pointed toward the photographs. Look. I stood. The surviving flower beds had been marked in different colors: white, yellow, red, purple. The destroyed beds were represented by dotted lines. Wolfe had drawn connecting lines between them. What am I looking at? The garden as it existed before the destruction. Yes. And the property map. Yes, they overlap. I looked more carefully. The garden lines corresponded with the old streets. But the measurements were not street measurements. They were property measurements. That's what we found before. No. What? We found that the flowers corresponded with properties. He tapped the board. I have determined how. He pointed toward the first line. White lilies. Correct. Yellow irises. Lot 31. Correct. Red poppies. Lot 42. Correct. The fourth line. 6. And the missing parcel. Lot. The numbers formed a sequence. I frowned. That doesn't look like a sequence. It isn't numerical. What is it? Chronological. I looked at him. The dates, yes. He pointed toward the ledger. Each number corresponds to a property, acquired when, at different stages. Then, the garden gives us the order of transfer. I understood. The flowers aren't showing where the properties were. They are showing how they changed hands over time. Precisely. He handed me a sheet. On it were 5 dates. Each corresponded with one of the property numbers. The dates formed a chain. The 4 legitimate properties moved first. Lot 1 changed hands last. The missing warehouse, I said, was the final piece. Why? Because it contained the records. Yes. I studied the reconstructed map. Then the fraud wasn't simply about buying property cheaply. No, it was about controlling the boundaries. Yes, moving the lines. Yes, making one property appear larger and another smaller. Exactly. And then transferring them through companies, yes. I looked toward the center of the map. Lot 118, Wolfe nodded. The warehouse was the ledger's physical counterpart. What was stored there? Original surveys, deeds, transfer agreements, correspondence, and the evidence that the boundaries were false. Yes, I sat again. Then why was the warehouse hidden? Because whoever controlled the records controlled the appearance of ownership. Bell and his associates, with Mason handling the legal side. Yes. Then Bell's final instruction. I stopped. Wolfe looked at me. The garden. Yes. Was Bell trying to expose his own scheme? No. Then why preserve it? Because he knew someone else might need to expose it. I frowned. That makes no sense. It does if you distinguish guilt from control. He leaned back. Thomas Bell was responsible for the transactions. Yes, but he also understood that the system he had created could eventually be turned against his partners. So he left a key. Several. The garden, the ledger, the numbers, the final instruction, the hidden property. Exactly. I looked again at the board. Bell prepared all this before he died. Yes. Then the sudden bloom wasn't somebody's recent invention. No. It was the final stage of a much older plan. The horticultural part of the mystery had been bothering me, had accepted the possibility that mature plants could be transported. Wolfe had not. He summoned Theodore Horstman. The orchid specialist arrived before noon, inspected several photographs, examined the surviving plants, and finally requested a magnifying glass. Wolfe handed him one. Horstman studied the roots of a surviving lily. These were dormant. Dormant where? I asked. Underground. For how long? Several seasons. 11 years. He shook his head. Not continuously. What then? They were planted at different times. Why? To control flowering. I looked at Wolfe. He nodded. Continue, Wolfe said. Horstman examined another specimen. These varieties can be encouraged to bloom together under controlled conditions. How temperature, water, fertilizer, timing. He looked at the photographs. Someone understood the cultivation extremely well. Could the plants have been prepared years ago? Yes. Then left dormant? Some bulbs and perennials can survive. Waiting for what? Horstman smiled faintly. Spring. Wolfe corrected him. Not spring. He looked toward me. A signal. The implication was startling. The garden was planted years ago, yes. Not last week. No. Someone prepared it long before the flowers appeared. Exactly. Then how did they know when to make it bloom? Wolfe answered. Control. Someone maintained the underground greenhouse. Yes. Samuel Price, possibly. The mysterious woman he mentioned, more likely. Who? That remains. Horstman looked at Wolfe. You have enough evidence to know the flowers were manipulated. I do. Then, you have your answer. Wolfe shook his head. I have one answer. Which? The flowers were not an accident. After Horstman left, Wolfe returned to the map. He placed the brass key beside lot 118. One thing remains. The key? No, the final instruction. I frowned. The ledger's last page. He opened it. When the garden blooms, the ochre will come. Yes. We assumed the owner meant the owner of the estate. That was our mistake. Then who? The owner of lot 118. But that property was secretly controlled. Exactly. So the person who benefits from the transaction. Yes. Wolfe tapped a name. Daniel Cross. Arthur Mason's predecessor, the solicitor who had ordered the boundary alteration. I stared. Cross. Yes, he's dead. Yes, then he can't come. Not himself. I looked at the map. The beneficiary, precisely. Who inherited Cross's interest. That is what we must determine. I stood. I'll search his estate. No. Why? Because he will come to us. Who? The beneficiary. How do you know? Wolfe's finger rested on the final instruction. Because the garden has already summoned him. At 2 in the afternoon, Arthur Mason returned. He did not ask permission. He entered the brownstone carrying a leather briefcase. I met him in the hall. You've come back. Mr. Wolfe requested my presence. Did he? Yes, that's news to me. He looked past me. I need to speak with him, of course. I led him into the office. Wolfe did not look surprised. Mr. Wolfe, sit! Sat. He placed the briefcase beside his chair. Wolfe looked at it. Where is the map? Mason's expression remained controlled. I don't know what you're talking about. Then why did you steal it? I did not. Why did you enter the greenhouse? I was inspecting the property. Why did you remove the ledger? I did not. Why did you destroy the 3 beds? I did not. Why did you threaten Mr. Goodwin? Mason looked at me. I never threatened him. You advised him to leave. That is not a threat. Your tone suggested otherwise. Wolfe dismissed the exchange with a small movement. Mr. Mason. Yes? Who owns Lot 14? Mason went pale. He recovered quickly. No such property exists. That is the official position. Then we agree. No. Wolfe opened the ledger. Lot 118 exists. Mason said nothing. It existed 27 years ago. Silence. It was concealed. It contained records. Mason's hand tightened on the briefcase. And someone has spent the last 27 years making certain records remain unavailable. He looked at Wolfe. You have no proof. Not yet. Then you are making accusations? No. Wolfe smiled faintly. I am reading a garden. Mason stared. For the first time I saw genuine fear. Wolfe stood. He walked to the board. Let us reconstruct the transaction. Mason did not move. Thomas Bell acquired property through several companies. Wolfe pointed toward the first line. Lot 17, then the second. Lot 31, then the third. Lot 42. Mason stared at the map. The boundaries were altered. No. He looked toward Wolfe. They were falsified. Mason remained silent. The old surveyor, Arthur Wren, changed municipal maps. He was instructed to. By Daniel Cross. Mason's face hardened. You have no right to mention a dead man. Dead men leave records. Wolfe tapped the ledger. Cross arranged the transfers. Bell benefited. The other partners benefited. And Mason. Mason's eyes narrowed. Where does Mason fit? Wolfe looked at him. You were Cross's successor. Nothing more. You inherited his files. Some. You inherited his clients. Yes, and his secrets. Mason stood abruptly. This is absurd. Wolfe's voice remained calm. You are the beneficiary. Mason froze. Not of Lot 18. He paused. Of the secrecy surrounding it. I watched Mason's face. The answer was there. Wolfe had found it. Mason lowered himself back into the chair. What do you want? The truth. You already know it. Not all. Mason looked toward the window. The garden. Yes. Who planted it? You know. No. Mason's expression hardened. You don't know. I know enough. Who? Wolfe did not answer. Instead he said, the garden was prepared years ago. Mason looked at the photographs. The bulbs were planted beneath the surface. Yes. The perennials were cultivated. Period was controlled. Yes. The pattern was designed. Yes. The garden was waiting. Mason whispered. For what? For the property to be sold again. Mason looked at him. Why? Because a sale would force a new survey, and the new survey would reveal the missing parcel. Exactly. Mason closed his eyes. The garden was a trap. No. Wolfe's voice was almost gentle. It was a record. He turned toward me. Mr. Goodwin. Yes? Bring me the photograph of the original garden. I handed it over. He placed it beside the reconstructed map. The flowers point to the properties. He indicated each bed. The missing beds point to the hidden warehouse. He touched Lot 118. The ledger records the dimensions. He tapped the numbers. The old survey proves the boundaries were changed. He placed the municipal document beside it. The garden restores the original map. He looked at Mason, and the final instruction identifies the person who will react. Mason said nothing. The garden was designed so that anyone who knew what had been done would understand immediately. He paused, but only one person would be frightened enough to destroy it. Mason's eyes remained on the map. Wolfe's voice sharpened. That person was you. Silence. No one moved. Mason finally whispered. Bell promised me it would remain buried. There it was. The confession, not complete, but sufficient. Wolfe sat again. Why? Because the transfer protected all of us. All of you. The partners. And you. Mason nodded. The warehouse records could have destroyed everything. So they were hidden. Yes. Lot 118 disappeared. Yes. The garden remained. Bell insisted. Why? Mason laughed bitterly. He said he liked insurance. I looked at Wolfe. Wolfe did not smile, even against his partners, especially against them. Mason finally opened the briefcase. Inside were several documents. The missing map, original correspondence, a property transfer, a letter from Daniel Cross, and one handwritten page signed by Thomas Bell. Wolfe read it carefully, then he placed it on the desk. Now we have the whole transaction. The letter explained what the garden had already told us. Bell had known the boundaries were false. He had participated, but he had also prepared a record of the original measurements and hidden it beneath the greenhouse. The garden was his final safeguard. If the estate was ever sold, the garden would bloom. If it bloomed, the map would return. If the map returned, Lot 118 would be found. And if Lot 118 was found, the hidden records would expose the entire scheme. Bell had created a secret capable of surviving him. Not because he had suddenly become honest, because he had become cautious. His partners could not betray him if he possessed the evidence that could destroy them. The garden was his insurance policy. 27 years later, it had become something more. Proof. Mason stood. What happens now? That depends upon Inspector Kramer. He knows. He is already on his way. Mason looked toward the door. You planned this? No. Wolfe's expression remained calm. You did. Mason frowned. How? You came here. He looked toward the briefcase. You brought the missing map. Silence. You brought the documents. Silence. You confirmed the transaction. Silence. And you placed yourself at the center of the garden's final message. Mason lowered his head. The doorbell rang. I went downstairs. Inspector Kramer stood on the stoop with 2 detectives. He looked at me. Well, I opened the door. Wolfe has been reading the garden. Kramer sighed. Of course he has. We went upstairs. Behind us, the Bellamy estate waited under the evening sky. Its surviving flowers were still in bloom. The 3 destroyed beds were still scars. But the message no longer needed them. Wolfe had reconstructed the entire pattern. The garden had done its work. It had restored the old map. It had exposed the missing property. It had forced the concealed transaction into the open. And most importantly, it had made the man who feared the truth reveal that he knew exactly what the flowers meant. The final question was no longer what the garden was saying. It was what Wolfe would say when every person connected with it sat in his office. I had learned enough about him to know the answer would not be brief. And, judging from the expression on Inspector Kramer's face as he entered, it was not going to be particularly comfortable for Arthur Mason either. Chapter 8. The garden gives its answer. By 9 o'clock that morning, Bellamy Street had acquired the atmosphere of a courthouse, a botanical exhibition, and a family quarrel conducted in public. Inspector Kramer had arrived first. That was how I knew the matter had become serious. Kramer did not ordinarily come to private gardens to admire flowers. He stood near the front gate with 2 detectives, while the surviving witnesses gathered inside the house. Arthur Wren had been brought from Queens. Samuel Price had arrived without being invited. Mrs. Eleanor Vance was there. Harold Mercer was there. Arthur Mason sat alone in the study with his hands folded over the handle of his walking stick, and I was standing beside the garden, wondering how many crimes could be committed by people who claimed to dislike flowers. Nero Wolfe had finally agreed to leave the brownstone. This alone was remarkable. He stood beneath the shade of the old elm in a dark suit, his expression suggesting that he regarded the entire estate as an unnecessarily large room. The garden stretched behind him. Even after the destruction of 3 beds, it remained extraordinary. White lilies, yellow irises, red poppies, roses, foxgloves, hydrangeas. The surviving flowers still formed the pattern. The scars only made the design easier to see. Wolfe looked at the garden for nearly a minute. Then he said, "Mr. Kramer." The inspector grunted. "I am here." "Good, I hope you have something." "I do." "Something better than flowers?" "Much better." Kramer glanced toward the garden. "I'll admit they're pretty." Wolfe's expression hardened. "They are evidence," Kramer sighed. "Of course they are." Wolfe had arranged the witnesses in the drawing room. Arthur Wren sat near the window. Samuel Price occupied a chair beside him. Mrs. Vance sat opposite. Harold Mercer stood near the fireplace. Arthur Mason remained apart from the others. Kramer took the center chair. I stood beside Wolfe. He had brought the recovered ledger, the old survey, the reconstructed map, the original property documents Mason had surrendered, the brass key, and 3 photographs showing the garden before and after the destruction. He placed them on a large table. Then he closed the door. "Mr. Kramer," he said, "you have been pursuing a property mystery." Kramer grunted. "I've been pursuing whatever you told me was important. That is not the same thing." "Get on with it." Wolfe inclined his head. "I shall." He turned toward Arthur Wren. 27 years ago, Lot 118 existed." Wren nodded. "It did. It was a warehouse property. Yes, it was connected to Thomas Bell, although the municipal records did not identify Bell as its owner." "No, why?" Wren looked down. "Because the ownership was concealed." "How?" "Through a holding company, controlled by Bell." "Yes." Wolfe turned to Kramer. "The first deception was therefore not the disappearance of the property. It was the ownership." He placed the original survey on the table. "The second deception was the boundary." Wren looked at it. "Correct. The boundaries of the surrounding properties were altered so that Lot 118 appeared to have been absorbed, which meant that the warehouse disappeared from later maps." Kramer leaned forward. "Who ordered it?" Wren glanced toward Mason. "I was given instructions by Daniel Cross." "Bell's solicitor?" "Yes." Kramer looked at Mason. Mason said nothing. Wolfe continued. "Cross prepared the legal machinery. Bell benefited. The business partners benefited. And Arthur Mason inherited the... Not Mason finally spoke. "I inherited files containing the original records. Some. Enough." Mason looked away. Wolfe turned to the table. "The false boundaries were only part of the scheme." He opened the ledger. "The partners acquired valuable properties through a sequence of disguised transfers." He read several entries. "Garden supplies, plant shipments, landscaping expenses, all ordinary enough." He turned the page. "But the quantities were not ordinary." He pointed toward the figures. 17, 31, 42, 6, 118. The numbers corresponded with property references and measurements. Kramer frowned. "How did you know?" Kramer sighed. "Naturally." Wolfe walked outside. Everyone followed. He stopped beside the surviving white lilies. "These identified Lot 17. He moved to the yellow irises. "These identified Lot 31. Then, the red poppies, Lot 42. He indicated the 4th surviving line, Lot 6. Finally, he pointed toward the damaged section where the missing parcel had been represented. "And here was Lot 118. Kramer stared at the ruined beds. "Someone destroyed these?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because they understood what they represented." Wolfe looked toward Arthur Mason. Mason remained silent. "That," Wolfe said, "is the simplest proof in this entire matter." Kramer frowned. Explain. Anyone unfamiliar with the original property survey would have seen 3 flower beds.
Correct.
Anyone familiar only with the current maps would have seen nothing significant. Correct. But someone who knew the old survey would know precisely which 3 beds represented the missing parcel. Kramer looked toward Mason. "So whoever destroyed them knew the old map?" "Yes." "Arthur Mason knew the old map?" "Yes." Mason said. "Approves." Nothing. Wolfe looked at him. "Not by itself." He pointed toward the garden. "But you made several errors." Mason's face tightened. "First, you insisted the entire garden be destroyed because it was damaging the property. That explanation was false. I had legal concerns. You had historical concerns." Mason said nothing. "Second, you entered the greenhouse. I had permission. You did not. I was representing an interest in the estate. That does not explain why you went underground." Mason's jaw tightened. "Third, you removed the map. I did not. You brought it here." Mason looked at him. "I brought documents. Among them was the missing map." Silence. "Fourth, you attempted to destroy the 3 flower beds." No. Wolfe turned toward me. Mr. Goodwin. I handed him the photograph. He held it beside the garden, observed the damage. The 3 beds had been torn apart, nothing else. Why these 3? Kramer asked. Because they represented Lot 118. How could Mason know? Wolfe looked at Wren. Because he knew the original survey. He looked at Mason, and because he had spent 27 years protecting the same secret. Mason rose. You cannot prove that. Wolfe remained seated. No. Mason smiled faintly. Then you have nothing. Wolfe's expression did not change. I have the ledger. Mason's smile disappeared. I have the original survey. Silence. I have the municipal records. Silence. I have the transfer agreements. Silence. And I have you. Mason slowly sat down. Samuel Price spoke. It wasn't Mason who planted the garden. Everyone turned. Wolfe nodded. I know. Kramer looked irritated. Then who did? Samuel looked toward the flowers. Her name was Clara Bell, Mrs. Vance gasped. Clara. Samuel nodded. Thomas Bell's daughter. Wolfe said nothing. Samuel continued. She knew what her father had done. How? Kramer asked. She found the records. The warehouse? Yes. Before the boundary change? After. Then she knew about the fraud. She knew everything. Mrs. Vance stared at the garden. My mother. Samuel nodded. She was the one who designed the garden. I looked at him. The woman you mentioned. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Because I promised. To her? To Malcolm? Kramer frowned. Why would Bell's daughter preserve evidence against her own father? Samuel looked toward him. Because she believed the property had been stolen. By her father. Yes. And Bell allowed her to do it? Samuel gave a tired smile. Not exactly, Wolfe answered. He did something more calculating. Everyone looked at him. Bell knew Clara had discovered the records. He touched the ledger. He knew she intended to expose the scheme. So he prepared the garden? Yes. But why? Because he wanted control over the evidence. Kramer frowned. That sounds contradictory. It is not. Wolfe pointed toward the house. Bell understood that his partners might turn against him. So he preserved the evidence. Exactly. He created an insurance policy. Yes, against his own partners. Yes, and Clara continued. Correct. Wolfe returned to the garden. He stooped beside one of the surviving flower beds. The plants were not all planted at once. Samuel nodded. No, some bulbs were planted years earlier. Yes, some perennials were placed underground. Yes, others were maintained in the hidden greenhouse. Yes. Why? To control the flowering. Kramer looked at me. I shrugged. Wolfe continued. The garden had to remain dormant until the correct moment, when the estate was about to be sold. Yes. Why then? Because a sale would require new surveys. Kramer understood. And the new surveys would expose the missing parcel. Exactly. Wolfe looked toward the damaged section. The flowers were a trigger, not a message alone, a mechanism to force comparison. Yes, the old garden against the new maps, the old ledger against the current deeds, the missing property against the altered boundaries. Wolfe nodded. Exactly. Arthur Wren spoke quietly. I wondered why Bell never destroyed the original survey. Wolfe looked at him. He did not trust anyone, not even Cross, especially Cross. Wren nodded. That explains the duplicate. Kramer turned. Duplicate? Wren looked embarrassed. There was another survey. Where? I don't know. Mason suddenly stood. Wolfe looked at him. You do. Mason said nothing. The original map was duplicated. Yes. By Cross? Yes. Where? Mason's voice was barely audible. The warehouse. Kramer stepped forward. Lot 18, yes. But the warehouse was supposedly demolished, officially, wasn't it? Mason looked at Wolfe. No, the room became silent. Wolfe said. It was sealed. Why? Because the records were still inside. Kramer stared. Then where is it? Mason looked toward the garden. Beneath the eastern boundary. I looked at Wolfe. The line of lilies. The eastern wall. One of the original flower directions. The garden had been pointing there all along. Kramer immediately ordered 2 detectives to secure the eastern boundary. The rest of us followed. The wall looked ordinary. Old stone, moss, bricks, nothing remarkable. Wolfe walked directly to one section. He stopped. Here. Kramer looked at him.
The garden.
He pointed toward the lilies. The line ends here. We examined the wall. A section of mortar looked newer than the rest. Kramer touched it. Get tools. 10 minutes later, the first stones were removed. Behind them was a narrow passage. Not a warehouse, a storage chamber, and inside were boxes, documents, maps, deeds, correspondence. The original survey. Lot 118. Missing property had not disappeared. It had been hidden. The altered boundary had merely concealed its entrance. Kramer stared into the chamber. 27 years, Wolfe nodded. 27 years, all this time. Yes, and the garden knew. No. Wolfe looked at him. The garden told us. The documents were removed under police supervision. Mason watched without speaking. Kramer turned toward him. You knew this was here. Mason nodded.
Yes, you helped seal it.
Yes. Why didn't you destroy the records? Mason looked exhausted. Because Bell had copies. And if you destroyed the originals, he would have used the copies. Kramer frowned. Where were the copies? Mason looked at Wolfe. In the garden. Wolfe nodded. The ledger, yes. The flower pattern, yes. The underground chamber, yes. The final map, yes. Bell made destruction impossible. Mason laughed bitterly. He made it expensive. Wolfe corrected him. He made it inevitable. By late afternoon, the evidence had been catalogued. The fraud was no longer a theory. The original survey proved the boundary alteration. The warehouse records proved the hidden ownership. The ledger connected the transactions. The flower pattern reconstructed the property network. Arthur Mason had admitted his role in concealing the records. Daniel Cross's documents established the legal mechanism. Thomas Bell's own records established the intention. The mystery had become history. But there was still one matter. Kramer turned to Wolfe. Why did the garden bloom now? Wolfe looked toward the flowers. Because the time had come. That isn't an explanation, it is. The plants had been dormant. Yes. Who activated them? Wolfe looked at Samuel Price. Samuel shook his head. Not me, Mrs. Vance said quietly. My mother did. Everyone looked at her. Clara, before she died. When? She left instructions. To whom? Samuel. Samuel nodded. She told me to maintain the underground greenhouse. All these years? Why? She said the garden must bloom when the estate was finally ready to be sold. Kramer stared. How did she know? Mrs. Vance looked toward the flowers. She said the family would eventually try to sell it again. Wolfe nodded. She understood the psychology of inheritance. What does that mean? People preserve property until they no longer need it. Kramer grunted. And when they sell, the hidden history becomes relevant. The sun was low by then. The garden looked almost peaceful. The ruined beds remained damaged. But the surviving flowers had taken on a strange dignity. They were no longer a puzzle. They were witnesses. I stood beside Wolfe. She succeeded. Who? Clara Bell, yes. She got the truth out, eventually, after all those years. Time is irrelevant to evidence. I looked at him. That's a very Wolfe-like thing to say. He ignored me. I smiled. There's something I don't understand. Naturally, why flowers? He looked toward the garden. Because flowers are usually admired for hiding nothing. I waited, he continued. Bell discovered that, arranged correctly, they could tell the truth. I laughed. That's almost poetic. No. What is it? Botanical. We stood there while the police carried boxes from the hidden chamber. Arthur Mason was escorted toward a waiting car. Arthur Wren remained beside the garden, staring at the old boundary lines. Samuel Price touched one of the surviving rose bushes. Vance stood at the house, watching the property his family had nearly sold without understanding what it contained. The garden remained in bloom, and for the first time since the case began, every flower seemed to be exactly where it belonged. Back at the brownstone that evening, Wolfe resumed his normal life. Fritz served dinner. The orchids received their attention. The newspapers received none. I had spread the day's notes across the desk when Wolfe entered. He looked at the pages. Finished? Yes. Completely? I think so. He raised an eyebrow. That is not a confident answer. I was saving the confidence for you. He sat. I leaned back. One thing. Do you think Bell regretted what he did? Wolfe considered it, perhaps. That's all. Regret is irrelevant. To justice, to deduction. He reached for his coffee. The facts are sufficient. I nodded. Then I looked toward the orchid room. You know, Wolfe, I still think the garden was beautiful. It was, even with all the fraud hidden inside it. Beauty and usefulness are not mutually exclusive. Would you ever keep a garden like that? No. Not it would require walking, I laughed. That was Wolfe. The city outside was settling into evening. Traffic moved along 35th Street. A taxi horn sounded. Somewhere a radio played. New York had already found another dozen things to worry about. The Bellamy Garden would eventually be sold. The property would change hands. The old house might be renovated. The greenhouse might be demolished. The flowers might not survive another decade. But the secret they had revealed would survive. The false boundaries were exposed. The hidden property restored. The records recovered. The conspirators identified. And the garden, which had seemed for a few extraordinary days like the strangest thing in New York, had finally given its answer. It had never been trying to conceal anything. It had been waiting for someone to look at it properly. And that, I had learned, was often the difference between a mystery and a solution. A mystery can sit in plain sight for 27 years. All it needs is one man clever enough to read the evidence. Fortunately, I knew such a man. Unfortunately, he made me do most of the walking.